The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Robert Chakowski, Managing Partner for On Demand Advisors. I'd like to welcome you today, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today's topic, I'm always very enthusiastic about, is 5 ways to improve your profitability today. So if you've joined us in past webinars and you've engaged with On Demand Advisors, you know that we are a company that has proven how to help you scale revenue and do that in a very consistent, capital efficient, and profitable way. But as you're scaling the top line growth for your company, and you're looking at how I want to grow the company, let's say 30% or 50% year over year on top line growth, it's also important to make sure that you have the underlying profitability that goes with that top line growth. So that's really what we want to focus on today is 5 ways that you can really significantly improve your productivity today and profitability. And so if you're a startup company, it's important that you can do as much as you can bootstrapped without going to external investors. And so that's going to be really a key if you're a startup company, is what's the most capital efficient way to do this, and how do you still have the contribution of underlying profitability to yourself and to your other principals. If you're a mid-stage company, and let's say you're a CEO running a mid-stage company, then it's really about you may be taking on investor money, such as venture money or outside investors. And there it's about dilution. So the more efficient you can become to scale and grow, but do that so that you restrict the rounds of capital, the more profitable your underlying company is going to be. And of course, if you're a CEO or running a large public company, as I have before, the key is different. The key always is earnings and distribution to shareholders. So that's really one of the major keys. And so if a company misses its number, misses its forecast, or projects lower than analysts are expecting, obviously that stock's going to take a huge hit, as Netflix did just recently. So I would just share with you that whatever perspective you come from today, profitability is really important in terms of how you engineer and move your organization forward. As with any of our webinars that we have every month, I would always encourage you to post your questions to the chat room, and I'll make sure that as we get into the Q&A session, that we get to your questions either during the webinar or after if we have too many. Sometimes that's the case. Just a brief introduction to On Demand Advisors. We founded this company 13 years ago as a revenue acceleration agency. So our mission is really to work with the executives that are joining us today on the webinar and really help you figure out how do you actually engineer your revenue growth? How do you do it so it's predictable, it's demonstrable, it's scalable, and so forth. And we've done that with many, many B2B companies. From a background perspective, I've been a CEO for both public and private companies in Silicon Valley, and I built 10 B2B companies at different stages, all the way from startups all the way through public companies. So it really gives you a perspective in terms of looking at different companies and what's the right growth strategy and profit strategy at each step of the way. Craig Remy, who is my co-founder of On Demand Advisors, came to our company from a very inclusive background, focusing on being CMO, Chief Marketing Officer for many companies in Silicon Valley. And before that, had a tremendous amount of experience working with some of the largest branding organizations out of San Francisco, really focusing on companies, really big brands like a Google, a Nike, a Levi Strauss. So just tremendous work that we bring together as principals for this company and our entire team that we have to help our customers succeed. So when we look at a revenue acceleration agency or firm as On Demand Advisors, a lot of times I get asked from our audience, what makes us different? I think the first thing is we're strategic. We always are looking at the underlying strategy of the company. When we talk about top line, bottom line, that's really important to figure out how you're going to optimize for both of those. How do you optimize the organization, and how do you scale in a very predictable way? Something we're going to talk about very briefly today, but we're going to have another webinar in a month from now on this, is putting in your revenue acceleration system. So as I've looked at revenue and revenue growth throughout my career and talking to hundreds and hundreds of B2B executives, one of the things that we found is that a lot of you understand how to bring a solution to market, a service, a solution, a piece of software, and so forth. What you don't know is how to do that with a revenue perspective. What's the playbook for your success? So what we're all about is creating that playbook, that revenue acceleration system that gives you complete transparency and control over how you're going to grow revenue at your company. And it's unlike any other program I've seen in the marketplace today. The second area is catalyst for change. One of the things I realized when I was a CEO, the first time I became a CEO of one of the companies, Intact, which is a software as a service company, which we had tremendous growth at and was eventually acquired by the Sage Group for $850 million. What I found is that when you're the CEO or when you're one of the executives, there's a great book out there called The First 90 Days. And what you realize is that after 90 days, your employees start thinking that they already know who you are and what you want to accomplish. And they may even stop listening to you in a way. So sometimes having outside catalyst to help you change or infuse change with your team is really important. The fourth area is something that we're all about, which is unparalleled innovation. I'm going to talk about one of those examples today in our webinar called a sales-driven website, which is how do you accelerate the digital sales and buying experience for your audience online. And then finally, we're all about implementation. Any good plan to drive revenue, drive profitability, to drive some of the strategic goals that you may have today, that's great, but it has to be implemented. You've got to implement it and achieve the results, or otherwise it's just another plan. So this is the revenue acceleration system. When we were scaling Intact as a software as a service company in Silicon Valley, we created this first iteration back then, and now we've perfected that with hundreds of B2B companies where we've actually helped them implement the system. And I say the system because marketing, sales, business development, all these areas that you have in your company are connected. So if you, for instance, do a great job in terms of demand generation, but you don't convert those into sales opportunities, then you're in a situation where you're not successful. And if you don't convert those sales opportunities into closed business and recognizable revenue, you still haven't succeeded in terms of the revenue gain. So we're going to discuss that in greater detail next month. And so I'm going to invite everybody on today's webinar to join us. So let's start off with a couple looks at profitability first. As you can see here, you've got your company, fast-growing green trees. Unfortunately, underneath the root system here, you've got erosion. So when I think about profitability, I think about what could erode your profitability. And there's 5 things that come to mind. The first one is just competition or lack of differentiation. You know, it's interesting. One of the companies that I worked with up in the Northwest had a very differentiated solution 10 years ago. But when we talked to them today, we found out that their industry, their space had become commoditized. So it's very easy to get into a situation where you view commoditization, and then that becomes price erosion and share erosion. Another challenge for a lot of companies is moving to a subscription model or a pay over time model. As one of my friends said that worked for me at 3 companies as my VP of business development, he says we took the $1 million license and turned that into a $50,000 subscription spread over 3 years. And it's true. And so that's a big challenge for a lot of companies because they're still trying to operate the same way that they did 5 or 10 years ago, which won't work. A third area is complex decision-making processes within the enterprise. So if you're providing your solutions or services to the enterprise, in many cases, getting decisions made is more complex than it used to be, and getting them through that whole process can be challenging. Fourth and fifth is really looking at working with the wrong customers or partners, or underestimating the true cost of sales. So any one of these could be an erosion for your overall profitability. As you would expect from today's webinar, we're going to talk about things that you can do that are going to help you improve your profitability. And we're going to walk you through these 5 areas. Now, there are more than these 5, but this is a good place to start. The first is we're going to talk about is evolve your bundling and pricing strategy. Then we're going to talk a little bit about increasing your wallet share with customers. Sales velocity is always important to companies because I often hear that the sales cycle is too long. Mapping the right channel to the right audience is interesting. And then finally, finding the right partners that will help you drive revenue growth. So let's look at the first one. Evolve your bundling strategy. So you all sell a service, a solution today. Now the question is, how do you bundle that? And that becomes important when you're starting to think about from a bundling strategy, because I'm going to give you some examples, by the way, as we go through today's webinar of our customers, clients that we work with today, and how we've helped them deal with some of these challenges and overcome them in a very constructive, positive way. So if you think about this from a bundling perspective, what typically ends up happening with many companies is you launch new solutions, you add new services, and pretty soon you may end up with, like I did at one company, whereas at Silicon Energy, we had 19 different point solutions. Now, nobody could sell 19 different point solutions. They just won't be successful. So what you got to really think about is, how do you bundle for decision makers in your target audience? What you position is what you sell. So let me give you some examples. One of our customers is in Houston, Texas. They're a leader in engineering performance management solutions, and they are called technical toolboxes. And as we worked with them over the past now going on 4 years, we've helped them launch many different solutions. And so today, if you look at technical toolboxes, they really have 15 different solutions to help engineering organizations in the oil and gas industry. Now, the upside is 15 different solutions into large oil and gas companies makes for a large opportunity base that they can go after. The downside is that their organization really can't effectively look at selling each of these point solutions. And so one of the things that we've helped them do is really rethink the bundling strategy and think about the different functions within these oil and gas companies that have engineering teams. Some teams like Chevron may have 7,000 engineers. And so those engineers are typically grouped into different areas. And so providing the right solutions, best-in-class engineering performance management solutions, if I'm in an inspection and performing inspections, let's say at Kinder Morgan, and I've got 70,000 miles of pipe under the ground, I need really good solutions to help me go through that inspection process, and so forth. So you can see what we've done is we've bundled those solutions into very coherent, closely knit solutions, all integrated into this hub platform, which is if you think about it, as the dashboard for the VP of engineering at those companies. Let me give you another example of taking a bundling approach. One of our customers is ICUC. They are a peer services company focused on social media management services to the Fortune 3000 companies. So their customers would include a Starbucks, a Google, a Coca-Cola, a Ralph Lauren, those type of companies. And we also help them launch many new services. And so one of the things that we looked at when we thought about these new services is we were starting with 4 services and then growing to 8 new services all told. And so the challenge was, how do we realistically bundle and provide the customers and prospects really a good way to think this through. So we helped them create something called the social customer journey. And what we realized is every one of the customers that would be at a Novartis, for instance, would be going through these 4 phases. And so what we ended up doing was making sure that if you're going to get discovered, that you're going to be able to use a number of their solutions around customer insight or social strategy. If the objective was to get connected, then you're going to use social listing and their content engine to really provide the right content to the right audience at the right time. If you were going to get involved in terms of the sales process, it was about social commerce and reviewing the reviewing management, much like you see today in the B2C space with Trip Advisor or Yelp or all these different solutions out there for reviews. And then finally, growing customer influence, building communities through the community management services, and also the social customer care program. So what we had here is 8 different services structured along the social customer experience. And this became very, very digestible, easily consumed by their large companies, customers. So here's a company that operates in 36 countries around the world and caters to some of the largest brands in the world. And really being able to take this, these different solutions that are focused on social media management and being able to structure them in such a way so they make sense for all these leaders involved in social media at these large companies. So that's a little bit about bundling. And you saw how we could intelligently do that. Now, the one thing I'd say before we get on to the next point about bundling is for a lot of companies, it's about driving higher price points with their customers. It's about really thinking through what's the right suite, because the challenge for most of you is if you don't do this, you're sitting there trying to upsell many different point solutions later on in the sales cycle, and that can become very, very expensive to go back to customers and try to do that. And to that point, we're going to talk a little bit about increasing wallet share with customers. So the key as you add more services, more solutions, is what's your wallet share? Not only how long do you keep customers, lifetime value of that customer, but what's the wallet share that you have? And I'm going to take you through a couple examples. And one of the interesting things that I found as you have new services, new solutions, is who's your best sales executive? Is it somebody on your sales team? Is it one of your partners? I would say it's a third person. The third person is your customers, because customers want to know about other customers like themselves that are using your services today. They want to know how those other customers are being successful. They want to know how those other customers are driving ROI. So one of the things that we found as we help companies in their upsell, cross-sell strategy with their existing customers is really to put first and foremost customers selling customers. That is the best way to get credibility. It's much better than getting it from an analyst out there or from third parties, because this is practical experience. It takes away the risk, and quite frankly, it shortens your sales cycle too. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple examples. The first one of our customers is a company called Scoodude. So Scoodude, great name. If you think about Scoodude, they provide a number of solutions to the universities, to community colleges, higher education institutions. In fact, 6,000 of these organizations are part of their customers. So their issue was not penetration. They already had excellent penetration into 6,000 organizations in higher ed. Their issue was wallet share. So what I did is I sat down with their president, and we would go to the conferences together, and we just got together over lunch and started talking about his challenge. And his challenge was they were an innovator. They had started with one solution and grown it into 15 solutions, but their average customer only had 2 or 3 solutions from them. So what we did is we helped them create a upsell cross-sell strategy. 3 things that we did, and I'll just touch on them briefly, is we helped them create monthly webinars and host those and put them together. And that's really where customers were providing demonstrations or testimonials to each other about how they use that service. We also did solution updates, and we also did the launch of new services and benefits that they would receive through the consumption of those services. And so that became really important and telling for them in terms of hearing their peers. We've done hundreds of these buyer intelligence surveys to understand what's in the heads of decision makers. And one of the things that Craig and I have found time and time again is that the number one reference group is one's peers. So if your peers are doing something and doing it well, you're asking yourself, how do I do that? How do I do the same thing? How do I apply it to my business? The second thing we did was we implemented QBRs. If you're not familiar with that, it's quarterly business reviews. And these would be sessions where you could sit down and talk to each of these institutions to really find out what's their strategic and tactical goals and performing what we call a health or performance check. So whatever service that they have from you today, whatever solution that your customer has from you today, let's say it's if you're in healthcare, it's a EHR or revenue cycle management solution. Or let's say if you're in banking, you have a banking platform. Or let's say if you're in IoT, you have some industrial automation solutions, which, by the way, I'm talking to the audience since I know who's coming to our webinars. You all do. In each of those situations, what you're really thinking about is how do we actually help them maximize the use of that solution or suite or service that you provide from them today. So it's important to be able to do these QBRs, quarterly business reviews. It's important to actually help your clients achieve greater success and performance with your solution. It makes them sticky, and it also gives you an opportunity to talk about other upsell, cross-sell opportunities that are available to them that could add value. The other thing that we found interesting is working and creating a customer reference program. And there are a lot of ways to create a customer reference program, but it's really important to be able to do that, to nurture that program, to grow that program, and to determine what referenceability means in their eyes as well as your eyes. So that's one of the first things I would say just in terms of wallet share. Another area that really will help you improve wallet share and profitability for new solutions or services that you bring to market is the launch program. It's interesting. A lot of companies that we look at are always releasing new services or solutions. And it's interesting because, it's like a footnote sometimes that they're releasing that new solution on Friday evening before the weekend. And so nobody really notices it. Nobody really gets it. Nobody really buys it. And so what we came up is with this program, we call it the pre-launch, launch, and post-launch program. And so as we're working with technical toolboxes, we just help them launch a new solution called Encroachment Manager, which helps their oil and gas companies manage all of the encroachments and crossings that happen with pipelines, which could be hundreds throughout the year. So we began this notion of saying, what do we want to do 2 months in advance of a launch? There are things that we want to put out there. There's credibility that we want to get. We want to get ahead of this curve. We also then help them put together the launch with the webinar, the slides, the speakers, a 30-day promotion, and making sure that the solution was on the website and that there was a buyer's journey on the website before that, as well as provide a success story. Now, many people, hundreds came to this launch, and it was very successful. But as you know, interest does not equate to revenue. So the next question is, how do we provide the tools that are going to be required to actually graduate that interest into a sale? And so we created the sales assets that were important to the sales team to be able to follow up and work with these champions, work with these prospects. And so that would be things like the buyer's guide, how to buy this solution, how to manage regulatory risk, how to have ROI, gain ROI or cost justification for the solution, and so forth. So the key here isn't just launching something. It's a great way to lose money through R&D if you don't make money on the back end. So this is another key to profitability. And then finally, peer-to-peer selling, as we talked about. Now, another one of our customers is a company called eBuilder. They are a software company providing capital management systems, construction management systems that are used by large companies. And here's a great example where AECOM, which is one of the largest engineering services companies out there, partnered with eBuilder to actually construct and put in the Minnesota Corridor light rail train system. And so that's a massive project. And so it was a very successful project that AECOM and eBuilder worked together on, very collaborative project. The challenge when you have these type of projects where you work with a partner is that in many cases it becomes a one-off. It's not repeatable or it's not leverageable. What we did is we sat down with eBuilder and said, how many account managers are in AECOM? Oh, hundreds, thousands. So there was somebody that owns the relationship here for the Minnesota CCLRT. And we said, yes. And we said, well, why don't we put together a webinar and share the success that these organizations had working together with all of the account managers at AECOM. And so we did that. And we did this also with many other engineering firms, Jacobs Engineering, Bechtel, Trimble, and so forth. And what was really interesting about this process is every time we would do these internally focused webinars with that major services company, it would generate another 5 to 10 different opportunities for eBuilder. So this is a great way to look at leveraging peer-to-peer selling. Let's talk about the third area that you can use to increase profitability. And this is about sales velocity. Now, sales velocity is really important today because if your price points are not where you want them to be for each of your customers or transactions, you've got to learn how to be more efficient in your sales cycle. And so anytime you can shorten your sales cycle, you can also improve your underlying profitability. You lower your cost of acquisition. And for many of you that are in perhaps software or the SaaS business, it's your CAC, your cost of acquisition. How do you lower that CAC so that you can be break even quicker with every new customer? So here, what we want to talk about is take your sales cycle, your sales process digitally, and accelerate that sales cycle by 33% or more. The way we help clients do that is by creating something, which is another one of our innovations here, called the sales-driven website. So what's the sales-driven website? Well, the sales-driven website is how do you take your buyer, everybody that comes to your website, and accelerate that process. So when we go to a website and we have interest in what a company does, it's the most valuable real estate that you have today. Because if you take one of the companies that is at our webinar today and you said, you know, I'm looking at your company and I'm looking at MIDI Enterprises and I really want to understand the company. You're going to come, you're going to drive 5,000, 10,000 people to your website every month. That's the moment of truth. That's the time when you actually have an opportunity to educate them, set preference, and actually initiate the buyer's journey, the seller's journey on the website. So that's something that we thought about long and hard at our company. And we started thinking about that at Intact. And then now we've done it with many companies that we worked with. So let me give you an example. At Technical Toolboxes, if you go to the website, we created their website for them. And you can go in there and you can look at solutions that they offer. You can also look at the offerings that they have by persona. So I'm a corrosion engineer. I'm an integrity engineer. I'm a design engineer. Take me specifically through the buyer's journey. So what we've done is we've taken the buyer's journey and we put that on the website. And it's been fantastic because we've helped them shorten the sales cycle, but we've also made sure that when somebody goes to the website, that they are already engaged in terms of that learning and preference setting process for technical toolboxes. So the value of a sales-driven website is, as you see with technical toolboxes, you get a chance to really project their brand and energy. One of the most important things is enabling your buyer or visitor to self-select. So if I come in here, I could select by industry, I could select by role, I could select by solution, or I could use some other criteria that I could select by. And then you would take me through the buyer's journey, the steps I would normally want to go through anyway, and help educate me and take me through the proof points. This is a phenomenal way to make sure that those that are engaged with your company are educated leads. Then what you have a chance to do as we put in marketing automation systems for these sales-driven websites is to prioritize everybody that's visiting your site, score them, grade them, and really look at who you're going to work with this month to help take them to the next step of that sales process. This is really about reducing your cost of sales, and it's also presenting a consistent experience. As many of you know, because of COVID, you've got the lack of an in-person experience with many customers and prospects today. So as things wane and we get back to the mixed use, you're still going to find a lot of your selling is going to be online. So you've got to have the right assets to be able to do that. And offline, you've got to make sure that those assets mimic the in-person experience that you have today. So those are the first three areas I would recommend that you consider in terms of improving your profitability. The next area is mapping the right channel to the right audience. Now, if I went to your website today, as an example, many of you would, if you sell a solution or a software solution or whatever, you'd probably have sign up for a demonstration on your website. The question is, does that reduce or increase friction in terms of the buying and selling process? And the answer is it increases friction. So you don't want to do that today because buyers are smart. You want to enable their journey and you want that to be accomplished digitally. So one of the things that we look at is completing the entire process. Now, a number of you may be here at today's webinar and saying, hey, we sell to the enterprise, we sell sophisticated solutions to the executive suite, and nobody's going to buy our solution online. And that may be true. However, you can take the education and the preference setting process, still do that on the website, and still have your sales team or partner team engage with your target audience. For those of you, though, that are looking at other solutions, such as, let's say you offer education or training, or you have add-on services, it doesn't make sense to incur an exorbitant cost of sales to do that. So why not take that online? And so what we do for many of our clients is we'll add WooCommerce or Shopify or a e-commerce solution to this overall website to complete that sales cycle. One of the customers we talked about is technical toolboxes. And so their engineering performance solutions are not sold on the website. However, they do an excellent job providing industry and solution training to their customers and to their audience. And so what we've been able to do with them is make sure that that whole process is streamlined and conducted entirely online. So those are the first four things I wanted to cover with you. Let's talk about number 5. We all need partners. We all have a partner ecosystem. The challenge with many partnerships today is that they're opportunistic, which means that they don't bear the type of predictable revenue growth that we want with partners. Many partnerships may never get actually implemented. They may be what we call paper partnerships. Or it could be a situation where you just figured out in retrospect, gee, we signed up the wrong partners. And of course, the best way to judge a partner is by how much revenue that they're helping you drive. And so in the end, it does come down to a number. And so one of the things that we realized is that there needs to be a better way to think about this, a more profitable way to do partnerships. One of the things that we did at Intact that I'll share with you that really talks to point number 4 and point number 5 of today's webinar is when we were looking at selling our financial management solutions on demand to the marketplace. One of the things that we realized is that we wanted to sell that replacement solution to CFOs. So from my background, I thought, well, gee, we've got to hire the best salespeople that have sold solutions to CFOs in the marketplace today. And so we did that. And we put them all over North America to begin with. And they were very successful in selling those solutions and closing one deal per month. Now we realized there was a lot of the market we weren't getting to. So we also built an inside sales solution team and we trained them. And much like we partnered with Salesforce, we trained them in the same process of selling as Salesforce did. And lo and behold, each of those sales executives inside were selling 3 deals a month. And we looked at that and said, wow, there's some efficiency there. And so we said, well, we wonder how much of this could we take online through the sales cycle? And many of us thought, well, there's no CFO that's going to buy a financial accounting system or get a heart transplant from us without really engaging with a sales executive throughout the entire process. But we said, let's create a sales-driven website anyway, and let's take them through that entire process. Lo and behold, we found that we could actually get about 20% of our sales through the website. And so my point is this: if you're looking at driving profitability, as what we're talking about today, you need to be open to matching the right channels with the right solutions. And so here is a great case in point where, because of my background, I was still thinking about selling to this audience the same way effectively we've been successful 10 years ago, but we were able to do that in a much more effective way moving forward and get better profitability and better success for each of these customers. So that's really the first thing. The second thing we did at Intact is half of our revenue came through partners. So we had 300 different partners. I'll call them CPA firms, market makers, market changers out there. And we realized we couldn't get to all the markets we needed to get to on our own through our own reconnaissance. So what we actually did is we figured out, why don't we go recruit the right partners that are going to work with us in each of these different industries or in these different geographies, and let's get the kind of coverage model that we need. So we did exactly what we're talking about in number 5 here. We created an ideal partner profile to figure out who are the right partners to work with. And then we actually went out and engaged, recruited with them. And very, very successful. And the other thing we did is we looked for partners that could use and leverage the embedded model, where they could take our solution, make it part of their solution, and take it to market as their solution. So the private label embedded model became something that became really important to us because we didn't want an opportunistic sale here and there. We wanted to have a sale all the time. One of the customers that we've worked with, one of our clients, is Gather Digital. So Gather Digital provides, on smartphones today, they provide all of the information you're going to need to have at your fingertips if you go to a conference. And so we wanted to help them look at all the ecosystem involved in managing conferences, service providers, software companies, and other types of firms. And so what we did with them is we created a scorecard. And I'm just showing you the first 4 items on that scorecard. But we created 10 items with them that we thought were really important to identify the right partners. And then we mapped the ecosystem of almost 150 companies, and we helped score that ecosystem to figure out who the right partners were to work with. And so once we did this, we made sure that they were working with the right partners going forward. We actively engaged with those partners. And when a new potential partner came to them, they could use their scorecard to figure out, was this a good partner to work with or not? So this is the second set of criteria we came up with. And then we've got the third set. But in the interest of time, I didn't want to take you through all of those details. There's a lot more there, as you can imagine. But I did want to recap these 5 ways to improve your profitability. Number 1, your bundling strategy. Bundling and pricing and making sure they're aligned with decision makers. Number 2 is increasing your wallet share and your lifetime value that you have with today's customers. Number 3 is reducing your sales cycle and really having sales velocity. And of course, one of the ways that we showed you today, and typically we're talking about 6, but one of those ways is with a sales-driven website. Number 4 is mapping the right channel to the right audience. Now, another thought about this too is Jeffrey Moore talks about a technology adoption curve. What I liked about what he wrote about in his books was this notion that you've got innovators, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And that's typical of most of us that have services or solutions that we're trying to take to market. The key here was having the right strategy to work with each of those audiences. And sometimes, let's say, the laggards don't want your solution or service in-house. They just want you to deliver the actual service or outcomes to them. So it's really important to look at your solution as it pertains to the adoptability of each of the different audiences that you have by segment. And then 5, of course, is driving partners that are profitable and the right partners for your company. So what I'd like to do at this time right now is just open this up for Q&A. And any question you have, please go ahead and take some time, post the questions, and really happy to answer whatever questions you may have today. Okay. So here's a question. This one is from Mary. Mary said, sounds good. Where do I start? Good question, Mary. I would say that the first place to start is just, let's start with the conversation. Because when you're thinking about growing and advancing your profitability, a lot of times we're starting with 2 questions. Number 1 is, where do you have profit erosion? And number 2 is, where do you want to gain profitability? So when you start looking at both of those questions, it gives you some really good insight about where to focus your energy first. Next question. This one is from John. Does cost reduction mean quality reduction? Good question, because sometimes when you think about these things, when we talk about taking cost out of your operations, sometimes the question that we get with many people is, am I reducing the quality with my customers? Am I reducing the quality of my experience? So I give you an example of the sales-driven website. And the sales-driven website was, how do we actually create a better experience with our customers? And how do we take them through the journey? Because if you're like me and you go to a website in the evening or on the weekend and you're looking for what they offer, it's very frustrating if you're in a situation where that individual walks away really without having their needs taken care of. So here's another question that we have, and let me go ahead and see if I read the question. We are a enterprise software solution, 6-figure per year. So it's a very consultative. Rather than schedule the demo as a CTA, would you recommend we begin to engage the buyer, or how would you recommend? A great question. So I come from that background, by the way. So I've worked with just about every major enterprise out there with a variety of companies selling 6-figure or 7-figure solutions to these enterprise buyers. And The first thing I would say is mapping the buyer's journey like we did with technical toolboxes, and figuring out rigorously what's important to your buyer. So if you're selling to the enterprise, you should really know for the decision makers out there, what do they want from you that's going to be helpful and useful? And then how do you structure that along the buying process? The other thing I would look at is when you're engaging large companies with six figures, is looking at from a consultative perspective is there a way to do an assessment up front? Is there a way to actually help them look at best practices? One of the companies that we worked with is a company that provides UI solutions, and they do that for large companies, medical device companies, software companies, financial services companies. And what was interesting is we engaged with them. We said, when you're doing these large projects where you're helping somebody really look at their user experience and change that user experience into something much more engaging, much more profitable, what do you normally do? What's on the top of mind for them? And they shared with us that in many cases, people want to know, is my user experience best of class or not? Is it best practices oriented? And then how does my user experience compare against my competitors? So when we worked with this company, we actually created an upfront assessment that we could do in both of those areas. It enabled us to offer them the ability to do the discovery that they needed to do with their prospects, but also provide something of tremendous value up front, that their prospects were looking for. So good question. A lot of great ways to engage um, and streamline the process with the enterprise. The last thing I'd talk to you about on your question as far as selling to the enterprise is that your sales driven website needs to mimic the sales process you're taking people through, because normally when you're working with a company, so for instance, when we worked at ATG, which is a e-commerce solutions company, they were selling their solutions into the largest companies, and um, we found that they had a whole project team or a set of stakeholders that they needed to sell to. So it was really important that the online and offline sales process was the same, because in many cases they couldn't get in front of all the different decision makers and influencers. So they needed to make sure that they were being consistent in terms of how they were telling their story. Okay, let's see. Do we have time for one more question? Let's see. Here's one more question. We have multiple companies. How do we apply these best practices? It's good, because if you have multiple companies, one of the things you typically look at is how do you take some of these best practices and replicate them across the various companies. So, for instance, we worked with a number of companies up in Canada that were part of one group recently. And what we ended up doing with them is we actually built a revenue acceleration playbook with each of those companies. We really looked at them first in each of their lines of business and figured out what was happening in each of those businesses. And then we helped them systematically put together a unique playbook to leverage these best practices, grow revenue, and also grow profitability. And that became really a good way to look at that. So thank you for those questions. Really great questions. One last question is from a company. It says, we're an IoT company. How can we look at this, what you're talking about? And good question. We work with a lot of Internet of Things companies that have great technology, focused in a lot of different areas: healthcare, industrial, manufacturing, and so forth. And a lot of times what we help them do is really think through their use cases that need to be fleshed out on how they're going to use that technology and apply it in each customer's business. Sometimes we even have to help build process maps to help the customer understand the gains or efficiencies that they're going to get out of this. But it's a good way to think about this as we're going forward here. Let's see. Any final questions we want to get to? That's good. Okay, so a couple of last thoughts here. If we get a chance to earn your business and work together, we have worked with hundreds of B2B companies, and we bring that serial experience together with you today. Our next webinars, just like today's webinar coming up next month in May. We're going to talk about the revenue growth engine that every B2B executive needs today. And so being able to put that system in, that engine, in your company today, and be able to take that engine with you as you go from company to company in the future is really important, because that's just really a critical part of your DNA and value that you bring to the table. In June, we're going to talk about something new and innovative called capitalizing on the buyer revolution. And what we're talking about there is that your buyer has changed. And so we're going to talk about what's changed with your buyer in 2022, and then how do you capitalize on that change so that you can do a better job aligning with your buyer. One last thought, and that is, from today's webinar, we appreciate your attendance. And if you'd like to sit down and discuss how to improve your profitability today, please reach out to us, either myself or to Craig. Give us a call or visit our website and let us know that you're interested in having a discussion. We look forward to it. And on behalf of myself, Craig Remy, and the entire On Demand Advisors team, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar and for your participation. Have a great year, everyone, and thank you again.